I'm Elliot Chodoff, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered, your go-to podcast for in-depth analysis on the complex and dynamic conflicts shaping the Middle East, Israel, and the world. Join us as we delve into the latest developments, historical contexts, and the geopolitical forces at play. We bring you the insights you need to understand the issues that matter most. Stay informed, stay engaged, and uncover the truths behind the headlines. Hi, and welcome to Conflict Uncovered. It's Sunday, June 28th in the morning here in Israel. I'm Elliot Chodoff. With me is my friend, colleague, Zev Uslan. And we are in the middle of another process of peace for our time. So we're going to be dealing with that soon. But in the meantime, Zev, how you doing?
I am well. I'm thankful for a quiet Shabbat, meaning quiet, not just no bombs, but quiet, nothing to read to get me upset. But of course, I was anxiously waiting to find out what happened in the latest scenario of the negotiations drama. It's a TV show, I think. So what's going on for me, for us, for what I want to discuss is hot off the press is the negotiations with Lebanon and Israel, with U.S. Acting as arbiter, and Hezbollah is saying you have no right to do that. And I'm sitting there going, this must be very confusing for me, but for others, because there's the Lebanese government, and then there's Hezbollah, and some of Hezbollah are in the government, but the government may not be Hezbollah. And we're negotiating with the government, but nevertheless, we're still being struck by Hezbollah. And so the negotiations and the agreements that seem to change twice a day, every day, are confusing. And anything you can do to alleviate my cognitive distress and moral calamity over this, I'd appreciate.
I'll give it a shot.
It's beyond repair.
First of all, you know that there's been an exchange, 2 days of exchange of fire between the United States and Iran, but it's all within the context of the ceasefire, so it's okay. The Iranians fired at ships in the Straits, and then at Bahrain and Kuwait, and America bombed targets in Iran. But none of this is a violation of the ceasefire, so things are moving forward very well.
So from my innocent, feeble brain is, well, that kind of smells, other than there are no air raid sirens, that smells like we're at war again.
No, war is when you have air raid sirens. Up until then, it's all beautiful. You haven't lived here long enough. In the meantime, over the weekend, there's an agreement between Israel, Lebanon, and the United States, brokered by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. I have a sneaky feeling, and I have to say this as an aside, that Trump is playing a variation of The Apprentice, where he's letting Vance do his project and Rubio do his project, and he's waiting to see the delivery, and then he's going to turn to one of them and say, "You're fired." And he can physically do that to Rubio. He can't physically do that to Vance, but he can figuratively do it to Vance. So, I don't know. That's just a gut feeling based on nothing more than having an extra glass of wine for Kiddush yesterday. Anyway, so we have an agreement with Lebanon, and in order to understand what it is and what it isn't, and also to answer some of the blatant, I'm never sure whether it's malice, idiocy, or both on social media. But a little bit of background that I've repeated often, but it bears repeating once again. Starting with the fact that Hezbollah is not a proxy of Iran. Hezbollah is an extension of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, which runs Iran today, and its export department, the Quds Force. And to give an idea of how much so, since we took out the Hezbollah leadership over the past couple of years, right now the command echelon, not the leadership, that's Naim Qassem and a couple of other characters, but the command echelon of Hezbollah in Lebanon is made up of IRGC officers from Iran who are now in Lebanon, who are for our purposes, military command of Hezbollah. Now, that is not something that Iran would do for Hamas or for the Houthis. They might send an advisor here or there. But it needs to be understood that Hezbollah was created by Iran after the revolution in 1979 in order to have a Khomeiniist Shiite organization, military organization, operating in Lebanon. And here too, just a 2-minute digression. Not all Shiites, not all 12 are Shiites, are Khomeiniist. There was already a Shiite militia, which still exists, called Amal, in Lebanon. It was not Khomeiniist, and since it was not Khomeiniist, they created Hezbollah so they would have an organization that would answer to the Iranian Khomeini government. Yeah, you wanted to ask
Quick
something
question.
or interject.
Geographically challenged. So Lebanon is to our north, and Syria is to our north/northeast.
Zev?
Why did they go after Lebanon, the Iranians, in terms of cultivating their people, and not Syria?
Can you hear me? No. Can you hear me? Are you there? Zev?
You're back. Did you catch what I said?
No, I got cut off. So start again from, you wanted to say something.
Yeah. Elliot, I appreciate the perspective that this is an extension of the IRGC and not a proxy, and the history. But geographically, Lebanon is to our direct north, and Syria is to our north/northeast. Why wasn't there a similar cultivation of an extension of the IRGC or proxy from Syria? Why was Syria out of the picture?
Two reasons. One is the Assad regime was very strong during that period. Lebanon has always been a weak entity. And two, the Shiites make up a significant proportion of the population of Lebanon. They do not make up a significant proportion of the population in Syria. And the Assad government, which was Alawite, was being challenged much more by Sunnis and Muslim Brotherhood type Sunnis. And when they were really challenged, as they were in the 80s, they simply went in and wiped them out. And the big difference here, it's a good question because it points up a contrast. The Assad regime, up until the war and the ultimate collapse of the regime, had a very, very powerful army that followed the orders of the regime. It also had special force units, Presidential Guard, Revolutionary Guard, whatever the guard, under loyal commanders, most typically Hafiz's brother, Bashar's uncle, Rifat, who was a bloodthirsty murderer, but who was their bloodthirsty murderer. And when they told him go in and wipe out Hama, he went in and wiped out Hama and killed, 30,000, 40,000 people, whatever it was, and bulldozed the neighborhoods into the ground. So Lebanon didn't have that. What Lebanon had instead, and I think this is, it isn't unique, but it's a categorical kind of a situation, a very weak state with armed ethnic groups and subgroups. In other words, it wasn't just Sunni, Shiite, and Druze. It was different, and Christians. It was different Christians, different Sunnis, different Shiites, uh, local groups, neighborhood groups. And I think this is something that's also important to understand about the Middle East, that it's very different from the West. Religion, ethnicity, and geography are intertwined. In other words, if you come from a particular village, I can tell you with a very, very, very high certainty what your religion is and what your ethnicity is. And the two are interrelated. So, for example, if you come from today it's been depopulated. Bin Jebel, you're a Shiite Muslim. If you come from Debel, you're a Maronite Christian. And so on. If you come from Khader on the Syrian side, you're a Druze. If you come from Rajar, you're an Alawite. It's something that we're not familiar with in the West. There's way too much heterogeneity and mobility. You don't have that here. So what had happened in the 70s is another, it wasn't the first one, civil war broke out in Lebanon on ethnic lines, commonly misunderstood, I think for ease of reporting, as Christians versus Muslims. It wasn't quite that simple. And that civil war led to the ultimate just breakdown of Lebanon. The Palestinian terrorist organizations, Fatah in particular, under Arafat, had moved there at the end of 1970 into 1971, after Black September in Jordan, where the Jordanians killed some 30,000 Palestinians in September 1970. And that destabilized an already unstable Lebanon. And that went in with the Israeli invasion of 1982, after Fatah spent 2 years rocketing northern Israel, Kiryat Shmona in particular. Sound vaguely familiar? Back to the Future. All of this was supposedly, and the Syrians moved in, just to make things more amusing. Syria never recognized Lebanon as a separate entity because Lebanon was part of the French Mandate of Syria, and it was created by separating it out when the French pulled out and they created two countries from one. The Syrians never recognized it. They always looked at Lebanon as a province of Syria, and they moved in and de facto took over in the 1970s. So when we went in 1982, we were fighting the Syrian army as well as the terrorists. The Syrian army was not driven out because we didn't take over Lebanon in 1982. We went up to Beirut and then ultimately withdrew to the Litani, South Lebanon, what was always referred to as the security zone. I always called it the insecurity zone. And Syria remained nominally in control of most of Lebanon. It all got resolved, so to speak. Middle Eastern resolution means that you've got a piece of paper that has very little value. In 1989, in an agreement signed in Taif, Saudi Arabia, known as the Taif Agreement, which ended the civil war and mandated the disarming of all the ethnic militias, which sounds like a really good idea. Hezbollah argued that it was not an ethnic militia. It was a resistance organization fighting the Zionists. The Syrians, of course, backed that because the Syrians were in deep with Iran and Hezbollah at the time. So Hezbollah was exempted from disarming in 1989. And that led very directly to where we are today, that the only armed group in Lebanon that is not the army is Hezbollah. It was built up and armed to the teeth by Iran via Syria right up until the collapse of the Assad regime. And that means that all of the other ethnic groups fell into line with Hezbollah because as much as you may not agree with them for religious and ethnic and ideological reasons, when an AK-47 is pointed at your head, you suddenly become a believer. And survival is more important than belief. So even Hezbollah's classical adversaries, the Christians, the Druze, and the Sunnis, backed Hezbollah. It went into the government because the alternative was now, let's fast forward to where we are today. Yes.
I have two heads. The Israeli head that eats this up and looks at it as history and looks at it as understanding sociology. And then the American head that goes, what? Huh? A, it's hard to keep straight.
Yes.
B, again, I feel like Michael Jackson. Why can't we all love each other? I mean, the level, what you've described, the level of characters and tribalism and conflict and death and murder is beyond even the most thoughtful Western thinkers who may not be academics. It's complex stuff. As I can see why there's a tendency to want to simplify this thing. I mean, it's like it's not understandable in a complicated form except by you and somebody of yours. So having said that and acknowledging that if we had a flow chart, it would be indecipherable of the characters and the arrows and directions and timing.
Correct.
But one last question is, or two questions. One is, I don't hear now much about the Lebanese Christians. He just added 2 sentences about that. And three is, how much are Hezbollah inculcated into the government?
Okay, so the answer to your first question is you don't hear much from the Christians, the Druze, or anybody else because they were disarmed at Taif, and they're keeping their heads down. And Hezbollah and the government is minor at this point. So here let's in the government, but the government is not the issue here. Guns are the issue. Let's go back to 1983 for a moment, because the agreement that was signed this weekend is not the first agreement signed between Lebanon and Israel. There was an agreement signed in 1983 after the Israeli invasion. President Bashir Gemayel, Christian, signed an agreement with Israel, and he was promptly assassinated by Syrian military intelligence. His brother Amin took his place, but he didn't have the fortitude to follow in his brother's footsteps. The agreement was never ratified by Lebanon. It was never ratified by Israel, and it remains a piece of paper, which, by the way, looks very, very close to the one that was signed this weekend. Now, there have been other leaders, Christian leaders in Lebanon, who openly opposed Hezbollah. Rafik Hariri, who was murdered by Hezbollah, for example. Are you seeing a pattern here? So we now come to where we are today, and another important point. Israel has withdrawn from Lebanon on 3 or 4 separate occasions. And the question is, why do we keep going in there? It should be obvious. It's not to annex territory. If we wanted to do that, we would have done it after the 78 campaign, the 82 campaign, the 2006 campaign, and a few other minor ones along the way. The area of South Lebanon up until 1982 was controlled militarily by Fatah and Arafat, and we drove them out. We drove them out of Lebanon. Hezbollah was built up. There are those who say that it was built because of the war in 1982. All the evidence is stacked against that. They go back to 1979, 1980, Tehran. The raison d'etre of Hezbollah is an extension of the Khomeini doctrine, which is America is the great Satan, the great enemy of the world, and Israel and the Jews need to be annihilated, not defeated, annihilated. It is a Nazi ideology. And I'll just give you one example of it. Hassan Nasrallah, who was the head of Hezbollah for many, many years until we sent him on recently to a better place, said a number of years ago that Hezbollah actually supports mass Jewish immigration to Israel, to the Zionist entity, because that will make it easier to wipe the Jews out, and we won't have to search throughout the rest of the world and kill them all around the world. It would be much easier to have them all here, concentrated, and the Zionist entity will become a large concentration camp and make it much easier to kill them all. Very friendly guy. And Naim Qassem, who's now the head of Hezbollah, thinks exactly the same way. You can see it in his writings. So there's no cycle of violence here. There's an original sin. The original sin, depending on which side you're on, is that there are live Jews who need to be killed, or there's an organization that wants to do it. I happen to be on the side that thinks the problem is the organization that wants to murder us, but there are plenty of people out there who think that's a really great idea. So when we go into Lebanon this past round or two, we find massive, massive infrastructure. I won't call it terrorist. It's military infrastructure, and we're still finding it in tunnels that are 10, 15 stories underground in solid rock. This is not Gaza, where you can send kids with hand shovels to dig your tunnels in sand, which is what they did for decades. This is heavy equipment. I got information that it came from North Korea. I haven't gotten a confirmation on that, but it makes sense. And we're finding tons and tons and tons of weapons, ammunition, rockets, drones, missiles, and the like, underground barracks, staging areas. And we know and by the way, and maps showing the plan to invade northern Israel and reach as far as Haifa in the initial assault wave. We know that there is a Hezbollah assault branch called Redwan, named after the nom de guerre of Imad Mournia, who we took out about 20 years ago, a little less than 20 years ago. He was the guy behind the Marine barracks bombing in the 1980s and the embassy, the U.S. embassy bombings. Remember the Hobart Towers in Saudi Arabia was also Hezbollah. They've never done anything to America. So what we've been doing is disrupting Hezbollah assault capabilities on northern Israel. That's the physical reality. And Hezbollah doesn't like that, and Iran is furious. It cost them a fortune. It will cost them even more to rebuild it. It'll be more difficult because the Syrian highway has been closed, at least as of now, and Iran has its own problems. So that's the sort of the framing situation. Iran, as we know this from the Memorandum of Understanding between Iran and the United States. Iran desperately wants Lebanon, Hezbollah to be part of the package. And they have threatened not to even negotiate until Israel withdraws and stops firing, and it's all Israeli aggression, and so on and so forth. This agreement separates Iran from the Lebanese negotiation. Now, it doesn't separate Iran from Lebanon because Hezbollah is Iran. But it does take Iran and the Iranian leadership out of the driver's seat, because now the United States can say, you don't have to negotiate for Lebanon. Lebanon is perfectly capable of negotiating for themselves. And the Iranians can scream and moan and all of that, but it'll be much more difficult for them to impose a Lebanese paragraph into the ongoing negotiations with America. And that's a major step as far as we're concerned. The rest of it is paper. And the paper only has value if it's backed up with force. And now we're seeing, literally as we sit here, we're seeing it unfold. The president of Lebanon, Aoun, is a Christian. By the way, according to Lebanese constitution law, the president of Lebanon must be a Christian. The Speaker of the House is something else, and the Prime Minister is something else. In other words, it's divided up a priori but on ethnic lines. But Aoun, the president, is a Christian. He is a former chief of staff of the army. And I am certain, without knowing him, that he would like to disarm Hezbollah and get them out. He has the closest thing to an opportunity now, closer than they've had since Taif, because we weakened Hezbollah and Iran is slightly disconnected. The pro-Hezbollah, meaning Hezbollah people in Lebanon, have been rioting for the past 2 days in Beirut over this agreement. And the government is threatening to send the army in to restore order, but they haven't done it yet. Yes.
Is the Lebanese army, can you give a brief summation of its level of competency, skill, power?
Good. Now, that question leads to the next sentence that I was going to say. The Lebanese army has two major problems in this situation. Problem number one is it is about 40% Shiite. So leaving the competence question for a moment, it's not clear what will happen if the order is given to the army to intervene against Hezbollah or Hezbollah-backed rioting. It's entirely possible that a major formation of the army, look at that 40% Shiites, even if half of them are Hezbollah loyalists, if 20% of the army deserts and goes over to the other side, they've got a real problem. So that's question number one. What will the Shiites in the Lebanese army do if, when they are ordered to fire on Hezbollah or Hezbollah supporters? Answer, nobody knows. Second question, even if they are virtually all loyal, never be 100%, but let's say 97%, do they have the combat skills to take on Hezbollah, which is a well-equipped, well-trained, well-organized military force that by all estimates is stronger than the Lebanese army? So Aoun is now caught on the horns of a dilemma. He desperately wants to get rid of Hezbollah, in my belief, but he desperately doesn't want to know the answer to the two questions I just raised. Because if either one goes against him, either one of those questions is answered in the negative, he doesn't have an army, and then he doesn't have a country. And I think he would rather live with the uncertainty than find out the truth. So what we're doing, and what makes this particular agreement interesting, is that we are going to evacuate two areas north of the Litani that were taken by the IDF on a pilot program. The Lebanese army will move into them, and in that area, they will deal with Hezbollah, getting Hezbollah out, keeping Hezbollah out, and searching for and destroying infrastructure. This will be under the watchful eyes of the IDF, which will still be adjacent to these areas in commanding positions. In other words, here, with all due respect to technology, and you know what I think of technology, holding the high ground counts, who will be looking down on them. And we'll see, perhaps, if necessary, go in and support them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be infantry support on the ground. It could be support by tank fire, by artillery fire, by air support. And maybe if they're loyal, again, answer question one in the positive, but not quite capable of handling Hezbollah on their own, with Israeli fire support, perhaps they will be. Now, the Americans are supposed to be giving them a bunch of money, not a huge amount, $130 million, some of which is supposed to go to military aid. There's supposed to be American advisors and supervisors going in. We'll see. But that's where we are at the moment. To summarize, the big news as far as I'm concerned, and what's important, is getting Lebanon out of the framework of the MOU between America and Iran. And two, the fact that Hezbollah is furious means that it's got to be a good thing in there somewhere. Will it work? Will they do to Aoun what they did to Jamal and Hariri and others? We can't answer these questions. I wouldn't write an insurance policy on him at the moment. But maybe he's better, smarter, more careful than the others were. We're just going to have to wait and see. But this can be easily and quickly overturned with one car bomb. And everybody knows it. So here we are, Peace for Our Time, round two. Get your umbrella, a piece of paper, and we'll see. Ultimately, it'll be tested on the ground, not in the signatory rooms in Washington with the photo ops.
Elliot, Thank you. Sadly, I feel like I'm watching a serial TV show because stay tuned. The next chapter of us, but next chapter of what's happening. But before we went on the air, we had mentioned some of the comments you've seen or received with simple responses, simplistic understandings of what's going on. And I can understand, strangely enough, with sympathy, the American mind looking at this in black or white or simplistic terms or good or bad. This is complicated stuff, Elliot. This is very complicated stuff.
It's extremely complicated.
And even good-willed, intelligent, and people who want to understand it, it's hard to understand. Other than there's lots of pieces here, and the effort to try to summarize something and who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, who's blending in with the good guys, who's blending in with the bad guys, and who changes this position through the eyes of American politics and that lens of black and white. This is complicated stuff. And frankly, I think it's easier sitting here, literally, in Jerusalem, in Israel, to comprehend how complicated this is than it is in the diaspora. I wish there really was a chart or something that just, who are the players? I've seen them before. There's like 15 players, and they all change sides and they all morph. It's bizarre. And so, again, I thank you for your clarity, because at least I have a greater understanding of the complexity. I couldn't rename who's who, what's what, where, but I do understand that these are some bizarre opposing forces that do not lend themselves to good or bad.
Yes, I would say just in one sentence, the closest parallel that America has to this is the drug cartel controlled areas of Mexico just south of the American border. There are obviously many differences, including ideological and the ethnic conflict and all of that. But I think that using it as an analogy is a good one because ultimately, after you get past all of the other stuff, and there's a lot of stuff also going on in Mexico, it boils down to there are some really evil, sinister people operating south of the border. Now, they're doing it purely for money, but it's money equals power equals money equals power. And here it's power equals money equals power. The variables are the same. They're just kind of reversed in sequence. And all the other stuff is important, but you can distill it down to one organization with one goal, laser focused on it, and willing to accept incredible losses in order to come around and do it again 3 or 5 years down the road. So the parallel is worth thinking about, and it may help in understanding,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that the average person in the United States will look at the drug cartels and say, "How do you live like that?" And in other words, right? It's there's a disconnect, and I think it's worth pondering that, and then doing the overlay to Lebanon with an organization like Hezbollah.
Elliot, thank you for the review. And I'm looking forward to our next series and to find out and understand what's happening as I try to stay reasonably attuned to the news and get thoroughly confused and try not to have simplistic thinking, which is very difficult sometimes.
Well, hopefully we'll have enough of a static situation to be able to get back on the road to October 7th that we left a couple of weeks ago. With that, to our listeners, thanks for being with us. If you enjoy it, pass it on, spread it around as much as possible. And in the meantime, stay safe, stay engaged. Thank you for listening to Conflict Uncovered. As always, it's been another rough day in the Middle East. We hope you found this episode insightful and engaging. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share and recommend with your friends, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. For more in-depth analysis and exclusive content, join our community and follow us on social media. Stay tuned for our next episode as we continue to explore the critical issues shaping the Middle East and the world. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.